Thank you for tuning into the Real Enough series, Book 1, Control+Alt+Delinquents Ch.6. If you've made it this far, you're obviously a fan and can't wait to see what happens next in the lives of Keith and Nettie. If you haven't done so already, please consider hitting the subscribe button and click the bell. The author of this series is working hard to get as much content out as possible, and every subscriber helps reach the goals needed to keep everyone entertained. Thank you so much for being a part of the community that puts these stories out there, and feel free to contact the author at any time by leaving a comment. If you can't wait for the audiobook to come out before finding out the ultimate fate of Keith and the Control+Alt+Delinquents, please look up the novel on Amazon and don't forget to leave a review. Thank you again for listening. We now present to you Control+Alt+Delinquents Chapter 6.
After a delicious dinner, Keith made his way back to the bedroom he shared with Nettie. She stayed in the main area as he hurried into the attached bathroom, eager to clean up after a long day. Whenever Jack visited, he always used the guest bathroom for privacy. But now that he had a sister, Keith couldn't help but wonder if they needed to find a way to divide the bathroom from the bedroom for added privacy. As he undressed and hung his boxers on the towel rack, Keith made a mental note to purchase a dividing curtain soon. He didn't want to intrude on Nettie's personal space. With his towel draped over the shower rod, he turned on the water and shivered as the icy cold stream hit his back before gradually warming up. Just as he was adjusting the temperature, he noticed a shadow moving on the other side of the shower curtain. His heart raced as he held his breath, expecting to see a figure holding a kitchen knife or hear an eerie orchestra playing. "Are you okay?" Nettie's voice suddenly broke through his thoughts. Keith let out a sigh of relief. "Yeah, just making sure I don't get any surprises while I'm in here." "I don't understand," Nettie responded quizzically. "The Bates Motel, Psycho," Keith clarified with a chuckle. There was a short pause before Nettie spoke again. "I see. Sorry for disturbing your solitude." Keith laughed. "No worries. You didn't disturb it. If you did, you would have pulled back that shower curtain and caught me in all my naked glory." With that, Keith began washing his hair as they continued their conversation about Nettie's impressive ability to pull up information and make clever jokes. The warm water cascaded down his back, melting away any lingering tension from the day as he enjoyed this simple moment with his new sister. As her voice trailed out, Nettie's words carried a suggestive tune, like a melody of secrets and desire. "I'm still in queue for that," she said, her tone filled with longing. "No, I just heard you gasp, and I knew you got beat up earlier. I was just checking to make sure you were all right." Keith chuckled, his voice heavy with amusement. "Nah, I normally get naked and then step in. But with you here, you know. I got to get in and then get naked, but then I usually set the water to the right temperature before I get in. It was freezing at first." Nettie nodded, her shadow casting over him as he spoke. "I'm sorry if this changes things for you. I'm sure the water was very uncomfortable for you." Keith shrugged, trying to play it off coolly. "I have a pretty high pain tolerance, I think." "You do," Nettie affirmed, knowing that she had witnessed him getting beaten up earlier. Keith could tell that she was making an observation about his toughness. "If you jumped in the shower and it was too cold, would you feel it? What would you feel?" Keith mused. "Let me find out," Nettie replied mischievously. Keith watched as she disappeared into the shadows, presumably taking off her clothes. The anticipation of seeing her undress made his heart race with excitement. "No, don't!" Nettie's shadow sprang to attention, revealing the silhouette of her baggy clothes still intact. Keith couldn't help but chuckle as he realized she had never actually undressed or intended to join him in the shower. Her shoulders shook with suppressed laughter as she playfully poked her hand through the curtain, 2 fingers extended like a peace sign. "Just because I'm an android doesn't mean I'm Chip Carson," Nettie quipped. Keith jokingly pushed her hand back out of the shower before grabbing a towel and drying off. Nettie stood outside the shower, wrapped in a towel and sporting a shower cap over her long hair. Keith's first instinct was to turn away, but he couldn't stop himself from stealing a peek. "You take showers too?" he asked incredulously. "Of course I can get dirty just like you humans," Nettie replied with a mischievous glint in her eye. "Dirty, dirty, or just regular dirty?" Keith teased, wondering if this was another one of her subtle innuendos about being in queue. You're such a crazy human, Nettie giggled as she stepped into the shower and turned on the water. Keith sat on the toilet lid keeping Nettie company while she took her first shower. How dirty did you get out there? He asked curiously. I only asked to be put in queue, Nettie reminded him playfully. Rolling his eyes, Keith shook his head at her antics before hearing her reply from behind the shower curtain. But let's not forget who ended up in the actual gutter, Nettie added with a grin. Yeah, but you've been living in the metaphorical gutter this whole time, Keith retorted with a smile. Smirking triumphantly, Nettie revealed that she had a secret weapon, knowledge about Keith's mild Aspergers Syndrome. Your mom told me all about it, your Aspergers, she revealed. Keith felt his cheeks flush as he realized his mother must have shared his personal struggles with his girlfriend. She did? He asked, surprised and slightly embarrassed. Yeah, but the funny thing is, you never seem to have any trouble picking up on innuendos when we're together, Nettie pointed out with a playful wink. Well, yeah, that's just because Keith stopped and smiled at himself. You what? You're different, Keith said. There was a pause before Nettie continued. In order for someone with diagnosed Asperger's to be able to respond differently with one person over another means that there was a reason to pay more attention to the details in the first place, Nettie said. I like paying attention to you, Keith admitted. So you're not going to mind having me around forever? Nettie asked. Keith chuckled. To have a person like you with me and all it cost was rearranging my room? $471,000, Nettie said. Keith gulped. What? The intricate components of my Android frame were carefully calculated, amounting to a rough cost of $146,000. Each piece meticulously chosen and assembled, from the advanced processors and inductors to the hydrogel skin and carbon fiber bone structure. And let's not forget about my impressive array of features, including cameras, microphones, gyroscopic inner ear technology, and software subroutines for autonomic functions, Nettie explained. As for my server room located in the garage, it consists of even higher functioning systems and satellite transfer capabilities. With backup transmitters at the ready, this state-of-the-art room boasts an impressive 1.7 petabytes of memory, 40 multi-core processors, RAID array drives, and coolant units, all adding up to an additional cost of $325,000. But money can't measure your true worth, Keith said with a smile. Ah, thanks, big brother, Nettie cheered. Keith let out a laugh before continuing. No, I mean it, you're priceless. Nettie giggled. I know you knew. Well, I knew that you knew that I know, Keith quipped. And there are other things I know you know that I know, Nettie countered. So why don't you just admit it? Keith crossed his arms and raised an eyebrow at his sister's playful interrogation. Because if you know that I know, then I know that you know more than you're letting on about other things. Nettie trailed off mischievously. Like this Angelica girl, for instance. Keith's demeanor shifted slightly as he tensed up at the mention of her name. What about her? I heard Mom say that you've never brought her to the house, and yet your friends who live 2 blocks over seem to spend more time with her than you do. They say they're just her study buddies. Nettie's voice had a hint of teasing in it. Keith let out a sigh. Fine, you caught me. I wasn't born yesterday, Nettie said confidently. You're right. You were born today, Keith admitted with a smile as he looked over at the shower curtain. But that smile quickly turned to surprise as an empty shampoo bottle sailed through the air and hit him on the head. Ow! What the... Keith started to say before realizing it was Nettie's doing. Oh, I'm sorry. Are you okay? Nettie's voice went from concern to barely audible laughter in a matter of seconds. Keith's mouth hung open as he stared at the wall, a plastic bottle twirling to a stop at his feet. I'm fine, just empty bottles flying around, no big deal, he muttered, trying to play it cool. But then another bottle bonked him on the head before bouncing off the wall and into the bathroom. Keith reached for the bottles scattered on the tile floor, determined to launch them over Nettie's head in revenge, but they just rebounded off the shower curtain and rail. Nettie poked her head out of the curtain, taunting him before shutting off the water. Keith quickly picked up the empty shampoo bottles and threw them in the trash. Nettie's voice echoed from behind the curtain. Oops, I forgot my panties. Keith couldn't help but laugh. You can hit me with perfectly aimed bottles and have an insane memory capacity, but forget your underwear? The shower curtain swung open and Nettie emerged, wearing a long t-shirt that did a decent job to cover her form. She casually pulled off her shower cap, letting her dark brown hair tumble down over her shoulders. My memory isn't like a file system on a computer, she explained with a small smile. I create pathways filled with commands and memories to piece together thoughts and processes. But sometimes things slip through the cracks, like forgetting my panties. Keith nodded understandingly. Well, if you keep losing them enough times, people might start to notice. Nettie narrowed her eyes playfully and gave him a mischievous grin that was becoming all too familiar. Soon enough, they were both lying in bed under the covers. As Nettie jumped in beside him without even asking, Keith's eyes widened in surprise as he saw the towel drop to the floor next to the bed. Keith's eyes flickered nervously to Nettie, who was lying on the bed next to him. The cue, right? He reminded her. His voice was strained and uneasy. The cue is intact, unless you're the one that upgrades the situation, Nettie stated coolly. She reached over to the bedside table and grabbed the remote control, before turning to Keith with a mischievous glint in her eye. I don't know how to turn on your TV. Want to put it on YouTube and search for Not Quite Human? Keith nodded, grateful for the distraction. He found the show, and they began watching it together. As they watched, Nettie turned to him with a serious expression. You ignored my question, though, she said, referring to Angelica's actions. Keith took a deep breath and glanced around the room. Nettie leaned up slightly, but he reached out to keep the covers up despite her adequately attired form, not wanting her to see his discomfort. Relax, I'm flat-chested, Nettie teased playfully, but there was a hint of concern in her voice. What are you searching for? Just making sure there's no empty bottles near my bed, Keith joked, trying to lighten the mood. But Nettie wasn't convinced, and she reached out to playfully wrap her fingers around his neck. Stop avoiding the question, you meanie, she exclaimed with a cute growl in her voice. Keith sighed and shook his head. Some things I don't understand. I'm too afraid to tell Jack about it, he admitted quietly. I don't really understand what's going on or what they're saying. He pulled his arm away from under Nettie's neck and leaned over her, causing her to sit up with a confused look on her face as he crawled on top of her. But instead of focusing on her in a romantic way, Keith reached for his cell phone, which was sitting on the table. Sorry, he mumbled, keeping his eyes averted as he pulled the sheets closer to Nettie's skin before returning to his side of the bed and lying down next to her. He turned on his phone and scrolled through some old text messages between himself, Chris, and Dean. I showed some of them to Jack, but not everything. I just didn't want him to know that I didn't understand. He handed the unlocked phone to Nettie. Go on, she urged, her curiosity piqued. Dean, hey Keith, do you have the password to that account where we can play that video game you brought over the other night? Keith, yeah, it's Ogarius 12. Dean, turn on your audio. Keith, what was that moaning? Dean, that was Angelica giving Chris a blowdown. Keith, I don't understand. Dean, you so slow. She gave me one and she just finished Chris off. You want to come over and get one? Dean, Keith, it's Angelica. Come on. I still want more. Keith, I don't understand what's going on. What are you doing over there? They said you were doing homework. Dean, yeah, homework. I'll talk to you later when I get home. Bye. Nettie slammed the phone onto the table, her eyes burning with fiery intensity as she turned to face Keith. She leaned in almost nose to nose with him as he felt her hands gently rubbing the back of his head, forcing him to look into her piercing gaze. Keith, she said, her voice low and urgent, you need to dump Angelica and take me instead, especially after that conversation. What are you talking about? Keith protested. She loves me. Nettie just shook her head in disbelief. Look at me, Keith, she demanded, still rubbing the back of his neck and head with her hand. Do you see the way I look at you? Keith nodded slowly, unsure of where this was going. Does Angelica ever look at you like this? Has she ever? Nettie pressed on. Keith remained silent, a sinking feeling in his gut telling him that Nettie was right. And what the hell is a blowdown? Keith asked, feeling a sense of dread creeping over him. Nettie shrugged nonchalantly. It's not even a real word, but I have a pretty good idea what it means. And I'm glad you're too naive to understand. But there was a gravity behind her words. It's bad that she was telling you about doing it to someone else, she said gravely. They were all taking advantage of you, including your so-called friends. But what is it? Keith persisted, desperate for answers now. Nettie let out an exasperated sigh and shook her head again. Keith, if you take me out of queue someday, I'll show you, she said cryptically, but not anytime soon. It would be inappropriate. My mom, your mom, might think she programmed me wrong, and I could end up in a scrap box. A $471,000 scrap box. Keith muttered under his breath. Nettie playfully pretended to strangle him, but the tension in the room was thick. "Just watch the movie with me," she finally said, trying to lighten the mood. And so they did. But Keith couldn't help but feel like something had shifted between them, and he couldn't shake off the feeling of unease that lingered after Nettie's cryptic words. The soft tapping of knuckles on the door jolted Keith awake. Rays of sunlight filtered through the window, casting a golden hue across the room and illuminating Nettie's sleeping figure next to him. He noticed she was wearing a sleek black glove on her hand that was plugged into the wall. A faint hum filled the room, signaling that it was some sort of induction device. Glancing at the readout on the side of the glove, Keith saw that it read 100%. "Keith!" Cassie's voice called out from outside the door. "How's Nettie?" Keith shook Nettie gently, causing her to stir and slowly open her eyes. "She's fine, Mom," he assured her. Nettie quickly pulled off the glove and rushed to the closet for her clothes. Meanwhile, Keith got out of bed and reached into a nearby drawer, retrieving a pair of panties which he playfully shook at Nettie with a mischievous grin. She shot him a knowing glance before snatching them and hurrying off to the bathroom in her long shirt. "Hey, Mom!" Nettie called out as she dashed past the door towards the bathroom. "I'm going to the store. If you two go anywhere, remember to send me a text and stick together today, okay?" Cassie reminded them before heading out. "Yes!" Keith hollered after her, already imagining all the adventures they could have while exploring their new surroundings. Nettie emerged from her refreshing shower, wearing a pair of light blue jeans and a t-shirt that proclaimed "No Balance" with the New Balance logo, except for a comical stick figure tripping over something. Keith couldn't help but chuckle at her choice of attire. "Did you pick that out yourself?" he asked, amusement evident in his tone. Nettie looked down at herself before meeting his eyes and nodding. She quickly grabbed her socks and shoes from the closet, ready to start the day. "Last night was a blast," she exclaimed. "Well, most of it," Keith added with a wry smile. "Speaking of which, about Angelica—" Nettie trailed off, worry etched on her face. Keith nodded understandingly. "I'll talk to her and make sure she knows I'm onto her games, and you can come with me to make sure she doesn't try anything else." "Of course I'll be there," Nettie replied firmly. "I'm eager to meet this so-called blowdown queen in person." A hint of skepticism crossed Keith's face as he raised an eyebrow at Nettie. "I still want to try and remain friends with everyone," he said, voicing his thoughts. "You shouldn't, but I support your decisions," Nettie replied with a shrug. "Oh, and are you going to introduce me to Jack today?" Keith glanced at the clock. Not today, it's Sunday and he's probably still asleep. As Keith rummaged through his closet, he noticed a pile of clothes in the hamper that Nettie had taken off the night before. Upon closer inspection, he realized they were his clothes crudely cut to fit her size. He shook his head disapprovingly and tossed the ruined clothes back into the bin. Grabbing a new pair of jeans and a plain blue t-shirt, he quickly got dressed. He then sat on his bed to put on his socks and shoes, but sighed when he remembered that he wouldn't be able to skateboard that day. Nettie noticed his disappointment as they both finished getting ready. "How far away is the nearest store?" she asked. "What store? A grocery store?" Keith replied absent-mindedly. But Nettie shook her head. "A store that sells skateboards." Keith ran a hand through his hair and shrugged. "Even if there was one nearby, I don't have any money. But thanks for thinking of it. I was looking at the class options while enrolling in the same classes as you, and I saw they had a woodshop class," Nettie said excitedly. "I don't take woodshop, though," Keith reminded her. "I know, but I thought maybe I could research and make your own skateboard deck. And of course, I would make one for myself, too," Nettie explained with a bright smile. Keith's heart swelled at her thoughtfulness, but also felt guilty about her potentially sacrificing a class for him. "You don't have to do that. I can live without a skateboard, but I would have trouble being without you for a class if that's what you were planning," he said sincerely. Nettie giggled. "No, I was just going to use the wood shop after hours." Keith gave her a skeptical look. "The school's security system is top-notch. You won't be able to sneak in and make skateboards without getting caught." But Nettie just grinned mischievously. "Oh, I already have a plan for that." Keith couldn't help but laugh at her determination and cleverness. Despite his protests, he couldn't deny how grateful he was for her thoughtfulness towards him. "Okay," Nettie said with a smile, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "What do you want to do today?" "How's your charge?" Keith asked as he adjusted his backpack on his shoulders. 100%, Nettie replied proudly. "How long does it give you?" "At least 17 hours of charge, 20 hours if I'm not exerting myself." Keith nodded in approval and grabbed his own backpack, already thinking of their plans for the day. That gives us all day. Let's go to the park, Keith suggested enthusiastically. If you want to, and when Jack gets up, he can join us, or we can go to his place one way or another. As they walked out the door, Keith made sure to pack his laptop and augmented reality glasses, essential tools for their adventure. Nettie stood by patiently, watching as he gathered everything he needed before joining him outside. The young girl's face lit up with pure joy as they stepped out into the morning light, as if it was the first time she had ever experienced such simple pleasures. It reminded Keith of the smiles he had seen on school children heading off on field trips, or exhausted adults finally getting a break from their mundane jobs. Unable to resist the happy energy radiating from her, Keith found himself grinning just as wide. He slung his backpack over his shoulder and walked alongside his new companion. He couldn't quite bring himself to think of her as a sister, given her obvious infatuation with him. So companion seemed like a more appropriate term. I'll have to get you a spare key for the door sometime, Keith remarked as he locked up their house and started down the driveway. That way you won't need me to let you back in. Nettie giggled at the thought before looping her arm through his and leaning her head back to bask in the warm rays of the morning sun. She trusted him to lead the way and was content to simply enjoy their time together. Nettie stood confidently, her arms crossed in front of her chest. I didn't plan on ever needing to come back without you, she declared. Keith's eyes darted nervously as he fiddled with his phone, debating whether or not to call Angelica. Nettie knew he still wanted to be friends with her, despite everything that had happened, but he also couldn't shake the feeling that he was being used as a rebound. Do you know what a rebound is? Keith asked, finally breaking the silence. Nettie paused for a moment before nodding her head. I'm surprised you know what that is, considering you don't even know what blowdown means. I don't want you to think I'm dumping her just because it's convenient, Keith explained. I mean, I know you want to go out with me next, and I really, really want to go out with you too, but I don't want you to feel like I wouldn't have if you weren't here. Nettie nodded understandingly. You would have still gone out with her if I hadn't been around, because you're a good person, and Jack alone wouldn't have been able to convince you otherwise. But I do know that it wasn't solely because you were madly in love with me. As Keith tried to process everything, he tapped his phone and waited for Angelica to answer. After several rings, it went to voicemail. Keith let out a sigh and began typing a text message, only to receive a message from Angelica first. Keith, I heard about what Jack said he saw last night, and there's no easy way for me to tell you this. Yes, I would rather hang out with Chris and Dean than with you, the message read. You need to back off and give me some space, or else this relationship will be over, and it's going to be your fault. Keith's jaw dropped in shock, and Nettie could feel her own anger rising. She took the phone out of his hand and quickly started typing a response. All she wants to do is hurt you, Nettie said, her voice seething with anger. She pulled out her stylus from her pocket, as she wasn't able to use her fingers on the touch screen like humans could. Let me draft a response and you can approve it before sending, okay? Keith was still trying to process everything when Nettie handed him the phone back. Angelica, gaslighting me into believing your fabricated justifications for a breakup on your end when you're the one who made all the bad choices is why I'm breaking up with you. And that's entirely your fault. Keith read aloud, his voice trembling with emotion. He took a deep breath and looked at Nettie, who had crossed her arms in front of her in a protective stance. You're right, aren't you? He asked softly. Nettie gave him a small smirk and winked. Consensus equals 1, she quipped. What does that mean? Keith asked, still confused. It means yes, Keith, I'm right, and you can trust me, Nettie reassured him. Feeling a sense of relief wash over him, Keith reached out and grabbed Nettie's hand as he tapped send on the message.